Welcome back, everyone, to the deep dive. This time, we're headed back to Forks, but not exactly to hang out with the Cullens this time.
Intriguing.
Yeah, we had a ton of requests from you guys to dive into Laurent
Oh, Laurent.
from the Twilight Saga.
Yeah.
And honestly, when I first saw all these Laurent requests, I was like, really? But then I started digging into the articles and analyses you sent, and I get it now.
Yeah, he's one of those characters who you think you have pegged, right? Like, oh, he's just with the bad vampire.
Exactly, just another villain, right?
But there's more to him than meets the eye. Like, he's not a vegetarian vampire like the Cullens, obviously.
Right.
But he's also not a total bloodthirsty monster like James.
No, not really.
He's got this, I don't know, this kind of grayness to him. Like, he's constantly caught between these different worlds.
That's such a good point. It's like he's wrestling with that whole question of nature versus nurture, right?
Totally. Like, are vampires just born evil, or does their environment, their choices play a role?
And Laurent's really right on that dividing line, isn't he?
He is, which is why I think he's so interesting to analyze.
Okay, so one of the first things that jumped out at me from these articles was the mystery surrounding Laurent's backstory.
Oh, yeah.
Like, Meyer never really tells us where he came from, does she?
Nope. It's like one big blank space in his character profile.
But we get these little hints.
Oh, yeah, for sure. Like, he's described as being more refined than James's coven, almost like he had a more, I don't know, sophisticated life before he was turned.
Right, like he doesn't quite fit in with those rough around the edges types.
Exactly. So it makes you wonder, what was his human life like?
Yeah. What do you think? Was he a scholar, a musician, an artist? What kind of past do you imagine for him?
Ooh, tough question. I mean, part of me wants to say he was maybe like a French aristocrat, something
Yeah.
about his demeanor.
I could see that.
But there's also something, I don't know, maybe a little melancholy about him. So maybe he was an artist, a painter or a poet.
Oh, I love that. That makes me think maybe that's what draws him to the Cullens on some level.
How so?
Well, they're not just about brute force, right? They have this appreciation for art, for beauty, for control.
Right, like Carlyle is a doctor.
Exactly.
Yeah.
So maybe Laurent senses that there's more to being a vampire than just hunting and killing.
It's like he's searching for something.
He is. And that search leads him to some pretty interesting places.
Yeah, doesn't it? I mean, he starts with James's coven, then he ends up with the Denali sisters for a while.
The Denali sisters.
Yeah.
Remind me who they are again.
Okay, so they're this coven that they only drink animal blood, not human blood.
Oh, wow. Like the Cullens.
Yep, exactly. So it's like Laurent is getting this glimpse of a different way to live as a vampire.
It's like he's trying on different hats.
Right, trying to figure out which one fits.
And then, of course, he ends up back with Victoria. It's like he can't quite escape that pull towards danger and, well, revenge.
Yeah, and then there's this whole other layer added by the actor who plays Laurent in the movies, Edie Gathegi.
Yes. This one source described him as bringing this gentleman vampire vibe to the role.
Yes.
Which seems so counterintuitive.
I know, but it totally works.
So how do you think that interpretation played into this idea of Laurent being more than just a bad guy?
Well, I think it adds this level of complexity to his character. Like, there's that scene in New Moon where he confronts Bella.
Oh, yeah.
And you can just see the conflict on his face. He's obviously thinking things through, weighing his options.
Right. It's not just mindless aggression.
Nope. It's calculated and maybe even a little regretful. Like, what if he'd made different choices?
It makes you wonder, if you were in his shoes, facing those same impossible odds, would you have made the same decisions?
I honestly don't know. It's so easy to judge from the outside looking in, but when you're actually in that situation, who knows?
It's like he's trapped in this game with these forces way bigger than himself.
Right, like the vampires and werewolves and their whole ancient feud.
And he's stuck trying to navigate it all just to survive.
And it's interesting because Edward actually picks up on that in Midnight Sun.
Oh, yeah. In Midnight Sun, we get Edward's perspective on everything.
Right, and he sees Laurent as this, like, master strategist, always calculating, always 3 steps ahead.
Okay, so Edward sees him as a threat, for sure.
Definitely. But he also senses this, I don't know, almost a flicker of admiration in Laurent.
For Edward.
For the Cullens in general, like their way of life, their restraint.
Wait, really? So even though Laurent chooses to side with the bad guys, so to speak, there's a part of him that's drawn to the Cullens' more peaceful existence.
It seems that way, which
Wow.
honestly just makes it all the more tragic, you know?
Oh, absolutely. It adds this whole other layer to his internal struggle.
Like he sees a different path, a better path.
But he can't quite bring himself to take it.
Yeah. It's like he's asking himself, is this who I am? Or is this just who I've become because of the world I'm in?
Man, now I'm really starting to feel for this guy. Okay, so speaking of difficult choices, we have to talk about that turning point in Laurent's story. You know what I'm talking about, right?
Oh, yeah, his death.
It's brutal. Even though, as a reader, you kind of know it's coming, it's still a shocker when it happens.
It is. And, you know, up until that point, we've mostly seen the vampire-werewolf conflict through the Cullens and the Cullens.
Right, they have that whole treaty thing going on.
Exactly. So there's a level of, I don't know, understanding there, rules of engagement.
But Laurent's death, that shows us how volatile things are outside of that very specific dynamic.
For sure. Like anyone could become collateral damage in this war.
And it really raises the stakes for Bella, too.
Absolutely. It's like, welcome to the supernatural world, kid. It's not all sparkly vampires and brooding werewolves.
Oh, no, no, no. This world has teeth and claws,
Yeah.
and it's not afraid to use them. Speaking of dangerous situations, one of the articles brought up something I found really intriguing. Apparently, Stephenie Meyer has said that she intended Laurent to represent a spectrum of morality. Not purely good,
Yeah.
purely evil,
Yeah.
so not a villain you just love to hate, but not someone you're rooting for either.
Exactly. A total gray area. And that's what makes him so interesting to talk about. Like, you see him doing these not so great things, obviously.
Right, he's not winning any morality awards.
Definitely not. But then there are these moments where you almost, like, sympathize with him.
Right, like when he hesitates before attacking Bella.
Yes. Or even when he chooses to leave the Denali.
Oh, yeah. Okay, so he spends some time with this coven that only drinks animal blood,
It's like a more peaceful, ethical way of being a vampire.
like the Cullens.
Exactly. And it seems like that lifestyle, even if he didn't fully embrace it, at least made him think.
Right, it's like a glimpse of what could be.
Exactly. But then he goes back to Victoria, and it's like, man, what are you doing?
Ugh, I know. You just want to shake him and say, dude, you had a chance.
Right. Like, why go back to the darkness when you've seen the light?
It's like that whole free will versus determinism debate, you know?
Oh, that's a good one.
Like, was Laurent truly capable of choosing a different path?
Or was he always destined to end up back with Victoria?
Maybe it's a bit of both.
It's probably both, right? Like, we all have these predispositions, these tendencies. But we also have the power to make choices, to resist those urges.
Yeah, I mean, Bella's whole journey is about making a choice, right?
Exactly. Becoming a vampire is like the ultimate choice.
It is. And she chooses a different path than Laurent, even though they're both facing similar temptations.
True. So even though Laurent's story ends pretty early on, in the grand scheme of the Twilight saga,
Right.
I think his impact is huge.
Oh, totally.
He forces us to question our assumptions about good and evil, and it makes you think, like, even the minor characters can have a lasting effect.
Absolutely. And speaking of lasting effects, Laurent's relationship with Victoria,
Oh, yeah.
that sets up some major drama down the line, doesn't it?
For sure. It's not a romantic relationship, that's for sure.
Oh, no, not at all.
It's all about power, about ambition. They're partners in crime, basically.
Equals, in a weird, twisted way.
Totally. And that makes his death even more tragic, in a way.
Oh,
Because ultimately, he's expendable to her, you know? Just another pawn in her game of revenge.
right. She doesn't even bat an eye when he's gone.
It's cold. It makes you wonder, what would have happened if he had survived?
Oh, man, now that is a question.
Right. Where would he have ended up in that final battle with the Volturi?
Would he have stayed loyal to Victoria?
Or would he have finally broken free and maybe even sought out the Cullens for protection?
Or the Denali?
Ooh, yeah. Do you think he ever truly let go of that idea of finding a more peaceful way to exist?
Man, it's tough to say. But that's what I love about a character like Laurent.
Me too.
He leaves us with so many questions, so much room for interpretation.
It's like Meyer gave us this puzzle, and we're still trying to put the pieces together.
Exactly. And, before we move on to some final thoughts, is there anything else from the research that really stood out to you about Laurent?
You know, what really gets me is how Laurent, even though he's not a main character, really forces us to ask some tough questions.
Like what?
Like, can someone admire goodness and still choose to do bad things? You know, he saw the Cullens, he saw the Denali.
He did. He got a good look at both of those lifestyles.
He still made different choices. So why? What does that tell us about human nature?
Ooh, deep. Even in the supernatural world, we're still grappling with the same questions about right and wrong, aren't we?
Totally.
Like, we all see examples of good and bad in our own lives,
Uh-huh.
and we have to decide which path we're going to follow. And sometimes, like Laurent, we make the wrong choices.
We do.
But maybe, just maybe, those mistakes, as painful as they are, teach us something, you know?
That's a good point.
About ourselves, about the world, about what truly matters.
Yeah.
It really is amazing, right? Like, Laurent, he's in and out of the story so quickly.
Right.
But he leaves such a big impression.
He does. It's like he throws a wrench into the whole good versus evil thing.
Totally.
Yeah.
Makes you realize it's not always so black and white.
And that's what good writing does, right? It makes you think, even after you've closed the book.
Okay, so as we wrap up this Laurent deep dive, I got to ask you, dear listener, one last what if. Let's say Laurent had survived. Where do you think he would have ended up in that final showdown with the Volturi?
Oh, man, that's a tough one.
Right. Would he have stayed with Victoria to the bitter end?
I mean, he always seemed to prioritize his own survival.
He did.
But then there's that whole thing about him being drawn to the Cullens.
Right. And the Denalis.
Do you think he really wished he could have made that kind of life work? The whole animal blood only thing?
It's possible. Maybe if he'd had more time with them.
Right, more time away from Victoria.
Maybe he could have actually turned things around. Imagine him fighting alongside the Cullens against the Volturi.
Oh, wow. Using all his knowledge of different vampire covens to help them strategize.
Right. What a twist.
He could have been their secret weapon.
Huh. I mean, knowing Laurent,
Yeah.
he probably would play both sides, waited to see who came out on top.
Yeah. Classic Laurent. Never fully committing.
A true wild card to the very end. But that's the thing, isn't it? Even if he'd survived, it doesn't mean he would suddenly become a good guy.
Nope, not at all. Some things are just too ingrained, you know.
That's what makes it so interesting to think about, though.
I know. And it's something we see in real life, too, right?
Oh, totally.
People who've made bad choices.
Yeah.
Trying to figure out if they can change, if they even want to.
Big questions, even in a vampire story. So, to our listener, we leave you with this. What do you think Laurent's ultimate fate would have been if he'd lived? Hero, villain, something in between.
No easy answers, but
No.
that's what makes it so fun to think about.
Laurent, everyone. A seemingly minor character who leaves us with major questions about good, evil, and everything in between.
He really does. Even though he's gone, he's not forgotten.
And that's the power of a well-written character. They stay with you long after you finish the story.
Absolutely.
Thanks for joining us on this deep dive into the complex world of Laurent from Twilight. We'll see you next time for another deep dive into a piece of pop culture that's got us all thinking.